Mr. Barela, as the person who is responsible for opining on and pontificating about and thinking about the economy here in the border full time, let me begin with you and let me ask you a version of the question I asked Mr. Hunt and Congresswoman Escobar in the first panel. We know by some metrics, we can argue about the particulars, some people may have a different view. We know, generally speaking, the talking point at least is that the national economy is strong. We know that the Texas economy, generally speaking, is strong. Would you say the same about the border economy? Is the border economy at the moment strong?
The border economy here in El Paso and the Borderplex region is strong. And I think the trend lines will continue to be strong for the next year or two. As was discussed in the first panel, the passage of the USMCA, TEMEC as it's called in Mexico, pending what should be automatic ratification from the Canadians, I think will unfreeze a lot of the investment that had been held back over the last 2 years. But despite that, Evan, the fact of the matter is that El Paso's economy continues to be strong and growing. We are at full employment. Ciudad Juarez, our sister city, has an unemployment rate below 3%. And I'm happy to report breaking news just this morning from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. BLS statistics just this morning came out. Our wage rates now are starting to outpace the national average. 4.2% wage growth year over year for the Q3 of 2019. That's phenomenal news. National average 3.6, Texas 4.2. That places El Paso County now in the top third of the counties for wage growth in the United States. So that's great news, and we're starting to see some traction. It's going to continue.
So I want to come back to you, Mr. Barela, shortly and talk about what gets us to the point where you think it's successful. What are the conditions on the ground? Mr. Mayor, you know that every election is in theory about the next 2 years or 4 years, but in reality, it's about the last 2 years or 4 years. So as people are considering you on the ballot this fall, one of the things they're going to think about is, are we better off than we were 4 years ago here in the city? Do you feel like the economy of the city and the degree to which you've had your hands on it is something that you can talk about with pride out in the world?
We've had some tremendous growth, as Mr. Barela said, about with Borderplex. I've got the statistics on where we are. We've had 28,500 non-farm jobs have been added since 2014, representing a 9.6 increase in employment. The El Paso unemployment rate has steadily declined over the last 5 years from 5.7 to 3.7, and now even there.
Tracking with where the state is roughly, which is itself a near historic low, right?
And the El Paso labor force has grown by 24,400.
Right.
So I think we're doing, we talk about primarily what the city has been doing with Borderplex. We've relocated our economic development division of the city to be in the same building close to Borderplex Alliance so that we can recruit companies and capital investment, which is the critical component to our biggest challenge here is the fact that our tax base is not keeping up with our growth in population.
Yep.
We've got a significant delta difference, and that creates limitations on city budgets, et cetera.
Right. That's something I want to talk about in a bit. Again, taxes and the policies around taxes and whether they benefit or don't benefit the city. Mr. Mayor, the phrase that is popular in the presidential election is, do we have an economy that works for everybody? I heard your statistics. I like Mayor Margo who brings the receipts. You came out here with the information that you did. But off the page, do you think that the economy of El Paso works for everybody?
I believe the economy for El Paso is growing and is growing in all sectors. So yes, I do believe that. Yep. And I'm seeing, but we still have the same deficiencies in certain employment areas, and John can address that as well as I can.
Yep.
And we need to understand that when you go back to the Higher Ed Coordinating Board 60 by 30 plan, that the requirements are not just to have a college degree, but a certificate of some sort, which could be professional or technical.
Right.
And we need more of that.
Yeah.
So that's been one of the critical. We're suffering the same maladies of everyone else.
Right.
Fort Bliss is our largest employer, always will be. It's larger, has a larger impact than the Maquilas do from Juarez, and there are 70 Fortune 500 companies plus over there. But I think overall, the biggest thing, one other thing that last year when we went through the migration process, the migration crisis, and El Paso became known as ground zero for immigration, I had great concerns over what it was going to do to our commerce with Mexico and the bridge traffic back and forth. You know, we have 6 of the 28 bridges that go into Mexico from Texas.
Yep.
On an average day, for people out there that aren't aware, we have 35,000 private passenger vehicles that come north. We have 22,000 pedestrians that come north, and about 4,000 containers, commercial containers that come north. Laredo has more than we do on the commercial side. But they took 650 employees from the border, from the bridges, and put them out along the lines for immigration control last year. That meant the lines coming across were 2 to 4 hours for vehicles, 2 hours plus for pedestrians, and I heard stories of about sometimes as much as 11 hours for some of the cargo containers. 22% of the city's budget is sales tax revenues.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Mexican consumers that come north. There are students, there are over 1,000 students that come to UTEP every
There are
day.
plenty of cliffs, in other words, right, in these numbers.
But the bottom line is,
Yeah.
I got word that our sales tax revenues, in spite of all that, went up over 4% last
Still,
year.
right.
Which means the El Paso economy, and I know that had to have a hindrance on it, the El Paso economy is growing faster than even I
Right.
anticipated.
It's strong enough to counteract the negatives, right? So, Ms. Baca Kotkowski, let me ask you about this, because you might very well be one of those concerned about those delays at the border. So, I want to ask you and Mr. Chiu, as business owners, do you feel the border economy being as good as Mr. Barela and the mayor say it is? You first, please. I think you may need to be on.
There you go. Yes, I do. I do believe it's strong. And what we need is better ports, faster technology. But it is strong, in my opinion. We're the second largest trade community region in the south border. So yes.
And your business has felt the impact of policies in the positive, and also maybe things that have changed that used to be in place but have been removed to free you up to do the kind of business you want. You feel like the policy environment has worked to your advantage from the standpoint of how healthy the economy is.
I would say that everything that is happening is pulling the border stronger. Even the new USMCA is bringing more companies that were in China back
Right.
to the border.
How much of your
So,
business is across the border?
90%.
90%. So in fact, if you're feeling good about it, that speaks to the mayor's point. Even with whatever complications have come up along the border, you're still able to make it work.
Oh, definitely. We have also, we do have domestic as a counter, my English.
You are so good. Do not worry about it.
But we feel that the driver is Juarez to the economy.
Mr. Chiu, do you feel as optimistic as Ms. Baca Kotkowski does about the state of things from your perspective as a business owner?
Yes, I think there's a bit of softness in this last few months, but business was stronger in early 2019, the last part of 2018. But not to say that it's not a strong economy. I think Juarez at this point in time, we employ close to 300,000. We closed the year with close to 300,000 jobs in manufacturing out of 450,000 jobs that are created the city has overall. So it's been it's a good environment. I think the new administration brought in some uncertainty, but that's somehow been dissipated. There are flares here and there with some new taxes, with some new changes, but overall, it's a strong economy on the border. Mexico is a different scenario. They're certainly at least in a technical recession, but that's not the case for
No, we're here to talk about our side, not their side. They can do their own symposium. We're doing one over here, actually.
I just wanted to say that our company is a flatbed specialized company and oversized and overweight. So we move a lot of construction materials.
Right.
So we've seen that growth in their,
Well, in some ways, you're a leading indicator for how things are, because if you're not doing business as a result of the construction industry being soft, you're a pretty good sign of that, right?
correct.
And you're not seeing that. Mr. Chiu, what are the most important things for you as a business owner? What policy decisions, what policies that are either put into place or removed drive your success?
Well, certainly the NAFTA and now the move into the USMCA is the principal policy that either protects us or takes away some of the abilities that we've had through the years to operate. The new USMCA comes to maintains most of the NAFTA.
Yep.
In our case, we're in the medical device space. That's not as affected as the automotive industry. That's something that I think short term there's going to be some adjustments. I think mid and it remains to be seen mid and long term. But I think in the short term, it certainly benefits the U.S. in terms of employment. Mid and longer term, I think the adjustments will be made, in particular as you increase the content within the region,
Yep.
which before was being used by parts coming from Asia, from Europe, that were being integrated into the supply chain, that were not necessarily benefiting any of the three countries, which now that changes. As far as all other industries in the case of medical devices, basically, it's all one of the things that maintains the protections that we have in terms of laws that we need to operate in any country. We have operations in Europe, and that's what we look for. That we have the property rights are respected,
Right.
and all that.
Right. Mr. Barela, what was wrong with NAFTA? Why did we have to move away from NAFTA to something else?
Well, put simply, it was outdated. It was ratified in 1995, and one chapter in particular is brand new, of course, deals with e-commerce. E-commerce essentially didn't exist. Well, it didn't exist in 1994, 95 when it was ratified. And there were other improvements made to the labor provisions, the labor chapter, the environmental chapter. I am pleased on the whole with how it came out. The strong bipartisan support is a rare example in Washington these days where we had that kind of support from both sides of the aisle. The one area where I think it failed, however, and I wish it would have been improved, is the TN visa program. Within NAFTA itself, there was established a TN visa program, but that was targeted toward the very, very high-end, highly skilled workers to go back and forth from Mexico, Canada, U.S. Think neurosurgeons, think computer engineers and the like.
Right.
We had a golden opportunity to widen the TN visa program to encompass a wide-ranging employment need and labor need in all three countries. And that was one disappointment that I look at, especially now because workforce development is the number one issue when a company is looking to expand or relocate here or anywhere else. We could have solved that problem in a way with the expansion of the TN visa program. North America would have been that much more competitive with the rest of the world had we taken advantage of that opportunity.
That's a challenge, Mr. Barela, for this community as you attempt to lure businesses from other places. People are thinking about the border region as a place to set up shop. There are some workforce issues that you need to deal with.
Well, this is not unique to El Paso. Virtually every metropolitan area in the country is dealing with that right now. And when you're dealing with a country at full employment, you are inevitably going to be confronted with that sort of challenge. However, our region is in a very unique position. We are one of the youngest demographic profiles that we have throughout the country is right here in El Paso County. It's a young workforce. It's highly productive by all objective measures. And we have a trained and trainable workforce that will supply the labor demands in virtually every sector in which we are pursuing. So we show the data to companies looking to expand or relocate, and that very often is a compelling reason why they move here. By the way, last year we had a record number of jobs in our organization, and with the help of the city, the mayor, the county, we're all rowing in the same direction to provide provide a very competitive environment here in
Yeah.
the Borderplex.
Mr. Mayor, we know that you and the president don't see eye to eye on everything, but you like the USMCA, don't you? You all are agreed on that.
Yes.
Yeah. What part of it is most important to you, and what part of it do you think contributes most to the health of the economy here?
Well, I think part of what John said, the fact that we finally got it ratified, removes
Just the mere fact of
just
it
the mere
removes
fact it was
uncertainty.
ratified.
And the idea that there's been investment capital on the sidelines cooling until we knew where this was all going, now that opportunity to access those dollars, we're there now.
About, 3 weeks ago, John, we had a trade mission to Mexico City at the behest of the Consul General here. My understanding is, and Dr. Wilson went, John went, I went, others, the county judge went, that this was the first time, I'm told, that El Paso had ever had a trade mission to Mexico City. And that's unbelievable.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So I think that we are activating the relationship. Our history as one region goes back over 350 years.
Right.
We were here 100 years before the United States was ever founded as one region.
Right.
Paso del Norte. And until 1848, when Fort Bliss came here, the majority of our population was on the south side of the Rio Grande. So we've been one region for that long. And the biggest challenge for me as mayor is not just articulating that, but we're still an unknown. I mean, we learned that during the migration crisis, and we learned it after August 3rd. We're just an unknown region. And the more we can explain the assets that we have, and I believe we have more in human capital assets here than there is oil value in the Permian Basin.
So the economic development toolkit for you begins with, but does not end with, the workforce possibility, the human capital.
The human capital is phenomenal here. And as Mr. Barela said, our median age is 32.
Yeah.
We're 2.5 to 2.7 million in our region.
Right.
With a median age of 32. We are total. There's nowhere else in the Western Hemisphere like El Paso, southern New Mexico, and Juarez.
Yeah. Ms. Baca, Kotkowski, do you have access to the labor that you need? Do you have a problem hiring people for the jobs you have?
Drivers.
Drivers. What's the issue there?
They jump from one place to the other, and the medium age for drivers is 50, 55. So we do have problems with drivers, hiring drivers.
Is there anything that government can do, local, state, or federal, to make that problem go away or make it easier?
I wish so much that the Obrero program would come back. So
Talk a little bit about that.
the Obrero program, I don't know if, John, I don't remember when it started, but it went for a while where they could come, work, pay taxes, go back home every 6 months. And it was very successful.
And that's a casualty of the current climate on immigration?
You probably know more than
John?
I do.
Yeah, definitely.
Mr.
It's a toxic environment when you talk about migration issues in today's world politically, both at the state and national level, unfortunately. And I think that's part of the reason the TN visa program that I referred to earlier
Did not get
did not
expanded,
get
as
done.
you say, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't demand the masters or graduates. So that is important.
Right, and that was something that was working, and you think, again, is a missed opportunity in its absence. It creates a problem for you and for the border economy by extension.
Yes, it would be great because everybody pays taxes, everybody's accounted for, and they go back.
Yeah. Mr. Chiu, have changes to immigration policy and access to labor affected your business as well?
No, one of the things that we have done is we have helped several of our engineers to get the visa and their ability to be on a program that eventually they will get a green card. We've been able to do that successfully over the last 10 years. But that's something that I think I have not seen many changes on that.
So you have access to the workforce you need. Your jobs are not going unfilled.
No, and the other thing is that 10 years ago, we made an acquisition in the Minneapolis area, which is one of the areas where there's a lot of innovation in medical devices.
Right.
Boston, Minneapolis, Salt Lake City, and in the Silicon Valley. And with that, the idea was to bring the science behind some of the things that we already did.
Right.
And but we had to develop our own design R&D engineers because we did not have the professionals, not locally, that had those expertise. So as a company, we had to develop that. And I think that's something that we need to do a lot more in our area. Because that's exactly what's going to create better jobs.
What policies would allow for that expertise to be developed to that point? What needs to happen for that to happen?
It's up to us, really. I think.
Is it through the Mr. Chiu? Is it through the higher education door? Is this something that Dr. Serrata and the community colleges can help with? Is it something that UTEP can help with?
Yes, certainly. We need to work together with the institution of higher learning, as William Serrata and UTEP, and we need to better communicate with the companies. We have a captive audience, a captive market.
Yeah.
They're here. There's 74, Dee mentioned 74 companies, Fortune 1,000 or 500 companies that are here, but they mostly do manufacturing. We do manufacturing, but we also do research development, and we do that in Juarez. There is one or two other companies that do that part of the manufacturing phase, which is research, development, sustaining engineering. And what we need to do as a community, as Dee mentioned, just as that trip to Mexico City to sell ourselves as a city, we need to bring those guys here, and we need to convince them that they can do research, development.
Right.
More of that here. I've been talking to John about that. The Secretary of the Economy for Mexico was in Juarez last month.
Yep.
I spent some time with him. We talked about that specific opportunity. But and they need to see us as what we are, a Borderplex, because the ability for us to do research, the ability for us to sustain the companies that we already have here manufacturing and be part of the very first part of the supply chain has to come from both sides of the border, not just one. And the other thing that's going to do, the decisions when, for years we've been talking about taking advantage of supplying to the industry. And we do a very poor job in doing that. Most of the components that are traveling from either Europe, Asia, other parts of the U.S., but few from our area. And the thing that we need to understand is that the decisions as to when you establish suppliers take place when you're designing the product, not when it has already been sent to manufacturing, which is what we've seen over the last 40-some years. So I think that's one area that we're starting to work on and will get us great benefits.
Mr. Margo, let me come back, Mayor, to this question of economic development, attracting business. Mr. Chiu just called out the need to bring businesses here to persuade them this is where they want to set up shop. You can only do so much. You can lead a horse to water, right? Are the conditions in place on the ground that allow you to prosecute that successfully? I mean, we've seen for years the success of, for instance, Texas attracting business to all parts of the state from higher tax burden states, right? That's one of the weapons we've had in the arsenal. What Governor Perry said for many years, what Governor Abbott has said is low taxes, predictable regulation, tort reform, the environment that is attractive to businesses as they seek to move from high tax states like California, Illinois, or New York. What more do you need to get people to get to yes here?
A lot of the site consultants do not have us on their radar. The biggest thing we've been trying to do is get them on our radar, as I kind of alluded to earlier, and we work with Borderplex on that.
So they can't come if they don't know that this is an option for them.
We're not necessarily on the top of their radar, and that's one of the things we've been really working hard on. But how do you get people here? Well, part of where people do is they come for conventions, they come for meetings, they come for different things. We have not even had, until recently, in the city's investments through the state sales tax rebates, we haven't had convention hotels large enough to bring in any significant groups.
Right.
So we've got 3 hotels, one's up, and 2 more are being completed. There's over 300 and I can't remember how many millions of investment, and the city's been heavily involved in incentivizing those for more hotel rooms. We need more convention space. We've been trying to build a multi-purpose special event center which was voted on in 2012, but it has been in litigation, and that would help. We need about 40,000 more square feet of convention space just to get people here.
So for a city of 700,000 almost, a county of 800,000, 21st largest city in the country, you're a little bit behind in terms of the basic infrastructure of economic development that you need on the ground to do this deal.
Well, I may parse with you on the semantics, but
I have no
think
doubt
the
that you
economic-
would.
I think we've been doing a good job as best we can on economic development, but we haven't had the basic infrastructure to attract them,
Right.
especially with convention space and hotel rooms. And now we will, before the end of this year, we
Yeah.
will have 2 new hotels up. We'll go with a 3rd convention hotel, and we're starting to attract more interest.
So it's an
across the
improvement.
board.
An
Oh yeah,
improvement, yeah. Right.
we were behind the curve.
Right.
Things hadn't been done like they should have been done
Right.
multiple years before. One of my goals for us as city council is to take care of enough of the basic infrastructure and things from public safety to potholes to parks to be able to start thinking about the next 30 years, irrespective of the fact that we're not going to be here to enjoy it.
Mr. Barela, you agree that the city's been playing catch up a little bit on the infrastructure side?
Yes and no. First, great cities have great downtowns. If you want to attract the workers of the future, you have to have a great downtown. The efforts to revitalize downtown is phenomenal. I predict in 5 years, a decade, for a city our size, we will have an unparalleled downtown. But we've all got to focus on that. It's very, very important. Second, our road construction here, while a pain for many of us on the roads every morning, we are staying ahead of growth. About $2 billion of road construction, and don't you know we use that when we talk to companies looking to expand or relocate. That's a huge advantage that we have. You go to the I-35 corridor, I don't need to tell you, I mean, it is a mess. It's an absolute disaster driving those roads. We really don't have that problem here, despite the construction. Third, where we really are behind, in my humble opinion, are ports of entry. Our ports from Santa Teresa to Tornillo are in bad need of upgrading, and I bucket it into 3 areas. We need to work in a concerted fashion to get more personnel at these ports of entries. Secondly, we need to deploy and do it fast technology, which, by the way, secures the border at the same time and facilitates legitimate trade.
Commerce, right.
Those are not incompatible
Right.
concepts. And the third thing is that we need infrastructure, more lanes, more ports.
And those are all, Mr. Barela, those are all federal responsibilities, are they not? That's nothing that we here locally or we here in the state of Texas can necessarily make happen.
Yeah,
That's
and
federal.
it frankly drives me crazy. It is a federal responsibility, but the responsibility keeps getting dumped on local communities, states to take up the slack. For example, the mayor will tell you that the city pays $1 million a year, at least, I think it is, to pay for overtime on bridges so that we can facilitate some of this legitimate trade. When I was cabinet secretary in New Mexico, we had to pay $500,000 to make sure that the Santa Teresa port of entry had extended hours because it closed at 8 at one point. Miriam will tell you that. And so, the lack of foresight, the lack of, on one hand, saying we need to secure the border and all of that, but yet the lack of funds
Right.
coming to support that concept is sorely lacking.
Mayor, who should be, if you should not have to dip into your budget, which is limited by definition, it can't do everything, to pay that money Mr. Barela was talking about, who should be paying the money? State or federal government?
Well, it's a federal government response.
Right. So
And
where's the federal government?
the staffing levels are not what they need to be, and this is one pleading I've made both to the White House and elsewhere.
You have conveyed this to your friend, the president?
I have conveyed it to the White House that we need to have full staffing to the extent that I have any influence, which is very lacking. But we need at least 200 more. People need to understand, you have, for Border Patrol, you have the green uniforms, that's along the border. On the bridges, they're blue uniforms. We need 200 more blue uniformed personnel on our bridges. The city owns all the bridges but one of our bridges, and that's the Bridge of the Americas, or BOTA, is a federal bridge. The state gave us, or has awarded us, $32 million for technical upgrades on our bridges. Mr. Barela is correct, and Miriam referred to that. We need better infrastructure. We're looking at that.
But the cost to provide it, just to be clear, Mr. Mayor, the cost to provide it is far in excess of that 32 million.
Absolutely. And we sent a delegation down to Laredo to see how their technology works on their crossing and their bridges, and et cetera. And that's one of the things we got to work on. But the staffing levels have not been proper since 1996, when a group of our personnel were shifted over to San Isidro for what I thought were political reasons in 1996, which is San Diego, and then they reduced the staffing levels to say this is the normal level. It's never been at the normal level
never
since
come back.
1996.
Right. Ms. Baca, Kotkowski, you hear about transportation infrastructure needs. We need more and better roads. We need to upgrade the ports. This obviously speaks right to the business that you're in.
Totally.
Right.
We are operating at 60%. We have 8 commercial lanes in Isleta, Zaragoza. How many are they open? 4. We have 6 in Córdoba, Bota. How many are they open? 3.
And that is all about personnel?
That's what we hear, that there's lacking of personnel, and to get a federal CVP officer, it takes more than 3 years.
Right.
So the vetting, the background checks, by the time they approve somebody, they already have 3 jobs before, or they're already hired somewhere else.
Right.
So it's challenging. In addition, we need 2 types of personnel: the back office, who can take care of the administrative, and then the officers who are in front line, because they use the officers who have they call the G12 level, to help with the immigration applications, with things that are
And that's
the type
not
of
the job
officer.
they're supposed to be. It's like the manager coming out to bag groceries, right? That's not actually what they're supposed to be doing.
So we are misusing our officers.
Mr. Chiu.
Yeah, and for example, one impact is that we used to be able to get across 4 times a day, on any given day. So you prepare yourself for that. Now,
Right.
if you're down to 2.5, and at times under threats at 1 at best, your warehousing is impacted on both sides of the border.
Right.
Your supply chain is impacted. So you have to think in terms of that. So it has a direct cost on your operations, not just in the number of drivers that you're going to have to get involved. We had a guy that his job was to just advance our trucks, and another guy that was there to take him to the restrooms and take him to take a nap. But we were getting online at 6 a.m. in the morning with 3-4 trucks, and we'd be lucky we'd get one. Now
You get one through, right?
One through. Now we're down to 2,
Right.
2.5. But why can't we be at 4 or more? That's the thing.
Ma'am.
No, Julio's totally correct. What people don't understand is that there's several operations for transportation. We have trucks coming from Monterrey, from the southern part of Mexico. They have to come to the border. They change trucks, and then they cross. So vocalization,
Yep.
specialization. We see Laredo, what's happening. We see Otay, what's happening. And we are lacking. Each port wants to be everything for everything. And if when we had the immigration crisis, in Santa Teresa, we had to brainstorm, and we decided how we were going to do. We closed on Saturdays. We brought those officers during the week. We extended the hours, and we had to give priority to one,
Yeah.
or POBs, the passengers,
Yeah.
or cargo. And we turned it around. We
Right.
doubled the numbers.
Mr. Mayor, you were a Republican member of the legislature once upon a time. You still have relationships at the Capitol with people who are in leadership. at the legislature and in the governor's office. Can't the state do something? The state talks all the time about how badly it wants economic development to happen and beats its chest over the victories that it puts up on the board on economic development. It would seem to me that you would be well positioned to be in Austin making it rain on behalf of the stuff that we're hearing about from Mr. Chiu and Ms. Baca Kotkowski. What's going on?
You sound like my dogs. They're the only ones that hold me in that high esteem. So we'll limit it at that. But the state doesn't have a function for getting money back. They have function for the most part, with the exception of sales tax revenues, of taking money. And the decisions that the legislature did last year cost the city of El Paso $7.2 million.
You're talking about the decision to restrain your ability to grow property tax revenue year over year.
SB2, everything else.
Right.
So we can't invest in our infrastructure to the levels that we could previously.
Right.
And we've had to resort with general obligation bonds.
So I'm clear about this. You believe that the property tax reform legislation that passed last session, which you traveled to Austin to testify against, along with local officials from all over the state, is itself creating a problem for the border economy in the way that you just said.
It's creating a problem for all cities in Texas.
Yeah, but I'm not asking other mayors. I'm asking you.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And I said it is creating a problem for El Paso
Right.
as we deal with our infrastructure needs with a growing population and a tax base that's not following.
Yeah. And you've conveyed this to the leadership in Austin
Ad nauseum.
ad nauseum. Yeah.
You know, but you go back to the bridges and the thing.
Yeah.
None of that's going to be fully resolved. Now, CBP has told me that they are on a fast track for hiring.
Right.
And they've said they shortened it to 6 months. They're doing that. They're having problems on background checks, some of the things we talked about. But until we do rational immigration reform in Washington, D.C., a responsibility of both houses and both parties, then we're going to continue to have these kind of problems.
Yeah.
So if they'd get their act together and develop some intestinal fortitude on both sides of the aisle and in both houses, then we could get this thing done.
How optimistic, Mayor, are you that they have a chance in an election season of getting anything done?
From an optimistic standpoint, not much, but from a prayerful standpoint, every day.
Gotta hope that. Mr. Barela, let me go specifically to that question of immigration policy and the effect or the impact that it has. I got a note today in my email inbox from a group called Forward.us. This is a group that advocates on behalf of the DACA recipients and DACA eligible residents of a state like Texas. You know how many DACA recipients we have in the state of Texas?
About 200,000.
109,000 are DACA recipients. There are more than 200,000 additionally who are DACA eligible. There's we're in a waiting period now for a Supreme Court decision that might enable the acting director of ICE, who said on January 23rd he'd like to do this if the court decision comes back, to deport all the DACA recipients. If the court comes back and says you are free to do that, they're talking about deporting all the DACA recipients in Texas. Forward.us estimated that would have a $6 billion negative effect on the state's gross domestic product. The DACA recipients currently in Texas are paying something like $750 million in federal taxes, $450 million in state taxes. That the economic impact on the state and on the economy of border communities, this is just one slice of it. If the Supreme Court comes back and says you're free to go ahead and deport DACA recipients. Sometimes, Mr. Barela, it seems to me that we can't get out of our own way in terms of what the economic impact of some of these policies are.
That's exactly right. It boggles my mind on some of these policies that are being pursued to deport these very productive, primarily young people.
These are members of the border economy workforce.
And they're incredibly productive, well-educated. Statistics and data show that they are far, far less likely to get in any kind of trouble. They are far more likely to be employed than native-born citizens. They are incredibly talented young people that we need desperately in our workforce. As I just said, we are lacking these types of skills. There was a great book by Jonathan Last called What to Expect When You're Not Expecting. Read the book, very heavy on data and statistics. However, the thesis of the book is a country that our birth rate is declining like many Western economies and Japan and others. And if you're not replacing those folks, with immigrants, you're going to suffer economically. It is frankly a conservative, and I consider myself still a conservative individual politically. It is a conservative argument on why you need immigration. And if we don't get our arms around this, it's going to be I wouldn't say an existential threat to our economy, but it will be a threat to our economy, both in Texas and in the country, if we continue to shun immigrants. And as the mayor said, there's a lack of courage in D.C. to push for comprehensive immigration reform. I'm hopeful that at some point we'll get our arms around that sooner than later. But I have to tell you, Evan, that I am not optimistic it's going to happen anytime soon, and we're going to suffer for that as a country and as a state and as a community.
Mr. Chiu, Ms. Baca, Kotkowski, the immigration policies that we now seem to be litigating in the public space, nothing's getting done, but we're arguing about them, it seems like, every day. These are detrimental. Mr. Barela is suggesting this is detrimental to your ability to grow your business or to grow the economy. Agree?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you have a proper legislation on that, you're able to move people from one side to another with
that would benefit your business. Benefit your
certainly.
business as well?
It will, because it's totally another issue about drivers and their jobs and how they're monitored. I mean, do you want to be monitored 24 hours a day?
Yep.
I mean, if you go to the bathroom, the alarm, hey, the GPS is saying that you stopped for half an hour. Where are you? So it's difficult. No, drivers are not. It's an invasion of privacy in a way.
We're going to go to questions in a second. Please line up on either side of the room as you have in the last couple sessions. We'd be happy to welcome you into the conversation. One last thing, Mr. Mayor, I want to ask at the end here what I asked Mr. Hunt and Congresswoman Escobar at the end of our session earlier about the election cycle and the outcome of the election and how you think it may or may not affect the border economy. I know the rhetoric of a political campaign tends to be heightened. Maybe the rhetoric of a non-political campaign tends to be heightened. Here's a quote. The president's false comments about El Paso and the border are detrimental to business development and job creation. Do you know who said that? Mr. Barela said that. And that was a while ago when the president was here, and there was a whole big fuss and over what some of the comments he had made about El Paso. We are heading into an election season in which that rhetoric is likely to spike back up, Mr. Mayor. So how do we think about the election cycle in terms of the prospects for the economy?
Well, I think that's going to be a big driver, but the question, or the comments of the pundits out there is that the economy will drive and people will understand and that there is growth, and so there may not necessarily be the change that others may so want. My big issue with the rhetoric is that, number one, I'm tired of having a politico determine what is our border security. I think it ought to be determined by Homeland Security and by experts there. It's this continual discussion with nomenclature on a wall, which I call a fence, which you will not have all the way up and down Texas. There's only 67 miles, I think, in the El Paso sector of fence now. Continues to create misimpressions. We had issues when there was the violence in Juarez during the cartel wars.
Yep.
We are one of the safest cities in the nation. We will continue to be one of the safest cities in the nation, irrespective of what happened on August the 3rd. And I remind people that in 2018, we only had 18 murders in El Paso.
Right. The political rhetoric, not so much around the August 3rd event, but generally would lead an uninitiated observer to think that that number was 10 times what it
Absolutely.
was.
So we're continuing to fight misimpressions, misnomers, the whole bit. But we go back to DACA. To me, it's idiotic that if you serve your military, that you are not automatically, axiomatic, a citizen if you choose to be one.
Yep.
It is ridiculous. So, and all of us here, especially in El Paso, know DACA children, students who don't even speak Spanish, okay? So, let's get their head out of wherever it is and perform.
Right. All right, let's go to, we could talk about this more, but let's go to questions. Are there questions on either side? Ma'am, go ahead, let's go.
My name is Maria Escobar, and I'm I'm on the board for the Leadership and Advocacy Council, and I have a couple of questions. I have two questions. I worked for 7 years at the maquilas in Juarez prior to 9/11, and there was a lot of concern on the wait times to get materials back and forth of the border, and because of the bridge and all that. Is there there's still an issue with that, and I see it as maybe it has hindered any companies wanting to come and be in El Paso, because the company I worked for was in El Paso, but the maquila was in Juarez, and I worked in Juarez, and I see that there's a lot less maquilas in Juarez than there
Right.
were then.
We talked a bit about that the conditions on the border now, wait times and everything else, may be a hindrance, Mr. Barela, for economic development, right?
That's correct. It is unfortunately a hindrance, no doubt about it. We're not optimizing our economic growth potential, our job potential, that's for sure. We are the fourth largest manufacturing hub in North America. We, in the last 18 months, surpassed Detroit. We're closing quickly on San Diego, Tijuana. Of all of the projects that we are seeing in the Borderplex Alliance right now, we're almost at a record level, by the way, in jobs leads and companies looking at our area. That's the good news. Of those projects, the overwhelming majority of which are manufacturing companies looking to relocate in this region. Again, part and parcel because of the USMCA ratification. So to the lady's point, you are exactly right. If we can't get our arms around this, companies will say, well, we're going to go to another border community. So it limits our competitiveness. You're exactly right.
Good.
And my second question was, you say that has the bridge wait times affected our shoppers, hindered our economy on the shoppers coming, because it's taken. I hadn't gone to Juarez in a while, and I had to go to the dentist. I came. It was 2-hour wait time.
Right.
And I asked the gentleman in blue when I got there. I said, well, why did the lanes go to 2? And there's all these hindrances on either side of wires and stuff. And his response to me was that can't they see that they're not welcome here? And that is why that we put roadblocks.
Mr. Mayor, we talked about Mr. Chiu's business and Ms. Baca Kotkowski's business. Those are big scale businesses. There's more mundane but still important to the economy retail business, right? Just the idea that traffic comes from one side of the border to the other. The economy benefits from that when it's free flowing, and it's not good when it doesn't flow freely, right?
The Mexican consumer is a critical component for El Paso's economy.
Do you have a sense of how much Mexican business contributes to the economy here?
No, we don't. That we have to guess. That's part of our problem, is trying to figure it out.
Right.
We're getting better at it. For years, when we'd recruit industry and talk about what impact a Mexican consumer had, historically, the data was going around the Cielo Vista Mall and the malls and looking at the license tags that were non-U.S.
Wholly unscientific.
So
Right.
you know. So, but we didn't have the data. We still don't have
Right.
good data.
Right.
We don't measure that. We can't find it. But the fact that I can judge my sales tax revenues, and given where we are, I think it's a positive on both sides. But the bridges do hinder commerce.
Mr. Chiu, I see you, and then Ms. Baca.
Yes, I guess one point is that thank God for the Sentry Line, which facilitates those of us that are registered to come across. But one of the issues is that the gentlemen in blue, as we've called them, they don't think that they're there to facilitate neither commerce nor traffic of pedestrians.
They're playing defense, not offense, right?
Exactly, and it is a very aggressive offense. There are times when that is escalated. There are times when it comes down. What creates that, who knows? But that's an issue, I think, that is not just the number as Dee mentioned, and that's important, but I think that they need to be properly trained and educated as to what the benefit of
Yep.
their job can be for commerce.
Right. Same. You feel the same way? Same.
Yeah, yes, it's a service. They have to have that mentality, and I think Director Mancha is working with the community to better that.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Sir.
Buenas tardes, o buenos días. Dama, caballeros, Ernesto, U.S. born, and I'd like to be able to say, are we in Twilight Zone or are we in deja vu? In 1976, I opened a maquila in Juarez, and the same questions about transportation and economic development were handled at that time by our President Natalicia and the Board of Trade conferences here. The number one problem was for economics was the border. Number one solution, which based out of El Paso, economics, the railroad. At this time, we have no railroad service from Mexico to the United States.
Yeah.
My question, in fact,
Sir, yes.
do we go from 1976 back to the same? The recommendations that were made back in 1976
Right.
are not followed to this point. So what we need to do, and the basis is here, the mayor of this town needs to collectively see the development, not only to the border crossing for pedestrians, but what is going to happen now that we have this backlog of trucks.
Let me ask the mayor, who's maybe not been here all the way back to 76, but has been here for a long time. You know that the fundamental point of this, that we've been having the same conversation for years about the things we need, is true, right?
Correct.
It's kind of definition of insanity territory. We keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, right?
But remember, most of the lead has to come from the federal government. We can do certain amounts. We can do that. You know, one of the drawbacks to 9/11 was the fact that President Bush at that time, his focus was going to be on Mexico. His entire focus was going to be on Mexico. His first state dinner was with Vicente Fox the week before 9/11.
Right.
And then everything changed.
Right.
Everything changed. So we've got to do it. We've got to do more. That's part of the reason we did the trade mission to Mexico City. We talked to the we talked about setting up a potential office for trade in Mexico City, which we've never had. All kinds of things. We're intrinsically tied by commerce, by culture, by family.
But there are still limits to how much you could do, is the point, right?
Correct.
You're not in a position to change everything. Okay. Hi.
Yes, hi, my name is Andreas Butner. I got a quick question. So in order to revitalize or have commerce coming into town, you need to have a retainability rate, an affordability rate, especially when it comes to income or to taxation of property around here. We're one of the highest paying property taxpayers in Texas.
Right.
So that keeps a lot of folks from maintaining their stay in El Paso, especially the ones that retire from the military, so on and so forth. Now, how do you see the future on the income tax rate proportional to all the construction projects we need to get the economy up?
Mr. Barela, let me start with you. Of course, we don't have an income tax in the state of Texas. I think what you mean is the property tax. Are we doing what we need to be doing on property taxes? Are property tax rates too high? Is everyone who should be paying their fair share? Is that revenue coming to the city and to the community in a way that, Mr. Barela first and then the mayor on that?
Well, the companies that we are looking at locating here are first and primarily looking at the competitiveness of Texas economies and the taxation system in general. So the fact there's no corporate or personal income tax gives Texas a huge advantage over many other states. So that's the first proposition. There are tools, however, and I'm going to answer the residential part here in a second, but from the corporate standpoint, the business standpoint, there are incentives on the table, 380, 381 agreements and other incentives that can make Texas very, very competitive. It's very important to attract, however, more businesses into this area, into Texas, into El Paso County, because the more businesses you have paying into the system, the more the tax burden is spread out for the residential folks. Your question is well put, because if one of the issues that we are going to confront as a community is the issue of those on fixed incomes, retirees.
Right.
Good news is you don't have a personal income tax. The bad news is your property taxes are very high, and that makes Texas communities less competitive, let's say, than New Mexico communities right across the river.
Yep.
And so those are things that we have to work on, but I'm sure the mayor knows this issue intimately.
And Mayor, add to this, please, this question of affordability or livability of the city. I mentioned earlier to Mr. Hunt and Congresswoman Escobar, 20% of the city of El Paso is in poverty, according to the statistics I've seen. Fourth highest poverty rate among the big communities in Texas. 26% of the population of El Paso County has no health insurance. I mean, there are people who have economic challenges here that maybe make it hard for them to think, as much as they want to be here, can they afford to live here?
You've got the social service network that we've got to work on, and the
Right.
state's behind. But let me address the problem we have with our property valuations and the property tax is that 72% of our tax base is residential. The entire goal of Borderplex and our city's economic development division is to bring in more commercial capital investment.
Is that a
with
high
jobs.
percentage as big cities go, Mr. Mayor?
We're flipped.
Yeah, totally.
Virtually every other city would be 60 to 70% commercial. You go
Commercial,
out there
right.
and tell- And we're 28% of our tax base is commercial. That's our big dilemma as we deal with growth. That's our problem. And if we could get that up, then we can reduce the tax rate for everyone.
Okay, let me take one over here.
Hello, my name is Joshua Mena, and I'm the founder of a local food startup here in El Paso, and we partnered up with the Mike Lloyd Center for Innovation here in at UTEP, and also the Medical Center of the Americas.
Yep.
And my question to you guys is, how come El Paso doesn't have more incentives for startups, like equity-free accelerators, tax breaks, and other tax credits that other bigger cities have?
Well. Jump ball.
Stay tuned. We are, as a matter of fact, engaging in a new 5-year strategic plan that will have a heavy emphasis on entrepreneurial activities. Dr. Wilson here at UTEP is also working very hard to establish the culture of entrepreneurial startups here and to help companies like yours. Congratulations on doing that, by the way, because you are a prime example of what is potentially a great growth industry here in El Paso. I could speak a half hour on this point, but let me try to condense the points very, very quickly.
Right, we're running out of time. That's good, please.
Let me do it in, looks like we got a minute. Here's the issue. It's a bit of a dilemma. We can grow companies here, and when you seek venture capital, seed funding, and the like, I saw this in Albuquerque, spin-off technologies from the labs. What you have are companies that grow, like yours, I hope, and then when venture capitalists come in from out of state, they move the company. Why? Because there's a perceived lack of talent here, especially in the STEM.
So it ties back to the conversation we had earlier about workforce.
Precisely.
Right.
So we're going to be working on that 5-year plan. This is going to be, I hope, a cornerstone of that 5-year plan, because the last thing I'll say on that, the big vision that I would love to see come out of that 5-year plan, amongst other big deal ideas, is to make our region the center for entrepreneurial and startups for Latin America, especially for Hispanic business people, young people. We should be able to do that. Nobody else has claimed it yet. Miami's trying to, but we are perfectly positioned to be the center for this type of capital.
Good. We're at a time, I'm afraid. Great conversation. Please thank Miriam, Baca, Kotkowski, John Barela, Julio, Chiu, and Mayor Margo. Everybody, we have lunch for you outside. Go on outside, grab a lunch. We're going to come back with our next conversation in about 40 minutes.